It's Sunday, 21st of October 2012. Good evening, Vasters. Welcome to some more live video tutorials. Today we are going to go back a little bit. We're going to take a step back right to some of the very basic parts to the Kurzweil PC3. We're going to look at how we assign things like LFOs and envelopes, because the Kurzweil PC3 isn't all that intuitive when it comes to these sort of things. Especially if you've come from a background with a different type of synthesizer. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at some of the other, like generically how synths use LFOs and envelopes, and then we're going to have a look and see how we do it in the Kurzweil. I'm just going to have a quick listen to the audio on the stream just to make sure it's all good. Okay, it's all sounding good. I haven't ravaged you guys with some horrible noise like I did a few weeks ago. Right. If you've used other types of synthesizers, and the example we're going to look at today is a Jupiter 8. And I'm talking here about subtractive synthesizers. So this is something where you've got a waveform, it gets processed through typically a filter or two, and then you through some envelopes and out to the audio world so that you can hear your sounds. If you've used those before, what you generally find is that if you want to apply some LFO to something like the pitch or the frequency cutoff, there's normally a knob assigned to that, or a slider, to allow you to do that. Even on a lot of modern digital synths, or like even going back to the Roland D5, some of the Korg 01 series, and even some of the more modern synths that come from that sort of hybrid, or that sort of I guess that sort of stable. There is normally somewhere in there the parameter to modulate the filter or modulate the pitch with the LFO. Okay, now most of these synths, it's actually a hardwired controller thing, and it's very easy to use because the slider's there, or the parameters there to adjust, and you can turn it up and down. So I'm going to show you an example here, and this is a bit of the panel from a Jupiter 8. Okay, so what we're looking at here, this is the voltage controlled filter, and we're going to have a look from left to right as we go across. So the first slider you've got there is called cutoff frequency, and that's the frequency of the filter, and if you move that slider up, the filter cutoff moves up. If you move it down, the cutoff frequency moves down. You've got the resonance there, which is, if you're not familiar with filters, and this tutorial really is aimed at beginners, new users. The resonance is sort of like, it's the ring, it's like an amplification at the cutoff frequency. And so by turning that off, it makes the filter often a lot more shrill. The next one you've got is a slope, and that's how effective the filter is essentially. So it can either be 12 decibels per octave, which means that after the cutoff filter comes in, it will, each octave you go up, you lose 12 decibels of additional volume. Or you can switch it down to be a sharper filter, which means that the high frequencies die away quicker. Now, the bit that we want to look at here are the next sliders, and the first one that you've got is envelope mod. On the Jupiter 8, you've got two choices. You can use envelope 1 or envelope 2, and the little switch to the right assigns which one of those affects the voltage control filter. So, envelopes, I went into a lot of detail with the envelopes in the last tutorial, so if you want to get a real good in-depth appreciation of envelopes, what they do, and how you can implement them on the PC3, just have a watch of that tutorial. It's a pretty long one, but we go into a lot of detail. But essentially what an envelope is it is a controller that starts at 0, it ramps up and then ramps down, and then when you release the key, it then dies away to nothing again. So it's a fairly simple controller, and you can change the times and the levels. And this is often used for, this is how you often shape a sound in synthesis is by assigning an envelope to change the cutoff frequency, for example. And you can make it punchy, you can make it slowly swell up, and the frequency content of the sound change. And an envelope is very useful for doing that. But on the Jupiter 8, what we're looking at here is that we can engage the envelope simply by moving that slider up. And the more we move that slider up, the more that the envelope affects the cutoff frequency of the filter. Similarly, we've got two more sliders there. We've got the LFO the LFO mod slider and the key follow slider. So the first one, the LFO mod, that's how much modulation is applied from the LFO. So you set your LFO up, which is normally something like a sine wave, and it changes the frequency in a sort of rhythmic or a sinusoidal sort of effect. And if you don't want any of that, then you put it down on 0. If you want a lot of it, then you push it up to the top. Key follow is the last parameter that we have there. And that is essentially the higher the key that you play, the more an effect that the more the effect on the filter it's having. So high keys will open the filter up more, low keys will close the filter in this case. Okay, so I hope I haven't confused things too much there. It's really what I'm trying to say here is on most analog synths and most synthesizers, assigning an LFO or assigning an envelope is actually very easy. It's as simple as moving a slider or by adjusting a parameter, because it's already hardwired into this VCF. Okay, just let you guys know, if you have any questions throughout this tutorial, just stick them up there on the chat. I've got the chat open so I can see your questions, and when I see them I'll do my best to answer them. So, hi to you all. Okay, now what I want to do is I'm going to explain a little bit here about the PC3 and what's different about the PC3 compared to the other types of synthesizers like the Jupiter 8. With the PC3, and also for the other Kurzweil instruments like the K2000 and the K2500, K2600, what Kurzweil have done is that they've sort of separated the parameters from the modulators. So a modulator is a mod wheel, it's an LFO, it's an envelope, it's the functions that are available within the funds pages, for example. They're all modulators. And on the other side you've got a bunch of parameters, and a parameter would be something like the filter cutoff, the pitch, the amplitude, the shaper amount, an effect amount for, let's say, delay time is a parameter. So what Kurzweil have done is they've separated these things out. There's a few of them that are hardwired, and an example that we looked at in the last tutorial was the amplitude envelope. The amplitude envelope is always hardwired to the gain of a layer on the outputs. So you can't turn that off. And this is the same as what we just saw in that Jupiter 8 example. You can't turn off the LFO modulation. You can turn off how much of it is applied, but you can't actually disconnect that wire and say that the LFO is not routed to the VCF filter, for example. Now, with most of the parameters, and key tracking is one that is also hardwired, and that's the key follow parameter that we had. But for all the other parameters, things like LFOs, envelopes, ASRs, functions, MIDI controllers, the sliders, the mod wheels, all those sort of things, they are not hardwired. You're free to assign them to do whatever you want. You might have a sound where you might want to use an LFO, but you might not want to use it on pitch or filter. You might want to use it to change the delay time, for example, or the reverb amount. And that's what the Kurzweil offers you the ability to do. Now, with this flexibility comes an extra step, I guess, if you want to do things the way that you do in other synthesizers such as Jupiter. Now, the reason I chose to do this tutorial is I get asked questions quite a lot on forums, and there's people that are new to Kurzweils, and they're used to programming other synths, and they're not sure how to get the same sort of effects that they were getting on those old synths. So what I want to do today, and we're going to go through this right now, is show you how to assign the LFO or an envelope to do something. So let's have a look at program 999. This is a default program. If we go in and we have a look at the algorithm, we see that there's not very much going on there. So let's put in actually let's change the algorithm a little bit. Let's get one with lots of 2 blocks. Okay, let's set this up as something like the Jupiter 8. So let's have a high pass filter. Where's the high pass? There we go. 2-pot high pass, and let's put the low pass filter here. This is essentially the same sort of architecture as what the Jupiter's got. It's got a oscillator that passes through 2 filters in series, just like this. Okay, let's start with a sawtooth. Sawtooths are always fun. So let's assign the key map. So again, because this is aimed at new users to the Kurzweil, the key map page is where you assign the sound that you want. So at the moment we're playing a piano. We were playing a piano. Hang on. Oh, where's my volume gone? I know where it's gone. It's because we've got these filters turned down. So let's just... Okay, so we've got the piano sound there. It's not very loud though. Just pardon me a second, I'm just going to turn that god awful noise off. Okay, now we can hear the piano. So let's go back to the key map page. Okay, so this is where we've got all of our sawtooths. So there's a sawtooth wave. Okay, sawtooth wave. At the moment I've opened the filters up so that you can hear it. Okay, so usually the first thing that we can do, if you want to assign a little bit of vibrato to this, a little bit of pitch modulation, and usually you do this with the LFO, the way that you do this is, it's all controlled through 2 pages, which are this DSP control page and the DSP mod page. So let's have a look at the DSP control page first. What we have in this page is, on the left hand side, if you can have a look on the left, you've got pitch, high pass frequency, high pass resonance, low pass frequency, low pass resonance, and level. So these correspond to the blocks on the algorithm. So you've got pitch is your first block, then you've got the high pass filter, the low pass filter, and then the amp. And that's how things travel through these algorithms. So the DSP control page allows you to change the parameters so that you can change, for example, the high pass frequency. So if we turn that up, and you hear all the low frequencies have come out. We take that back down again. If we turn up the resonance, put a lot of resonance so you can hear it. And if we you can't hear it at the moment, but as we scroll through these frequencies, you'll be able to hear the resonance in effect on the high pass. So here we go again. Okay, so that's what this page here lets you do. It lets you set the base values or the starting values for that control, for that particular block. Same thing with the low pass. You can set them here. So what we're going to do, we're going to leave the high pass right open with no resonance, and we're going to set. Let's do the pitch first. So we'll leave that wide open as well. So pitch at the moment is at 0 semitones. It's not transposed at all. Let's say that we want to put some vibrato on it. Okay. One other thing that you will see here, and pitch is actually a bad one for this. You can assign key tracking within the pitch page here, but it's also assigned on the key map page. So if you have a look on the key map page, this key tracking is the parameter that is sort of like that key follow that we saw in that example before of the Jupiter 8. What it says here is that the keys are mapped 100 cents or centitones per key. So So basically it's a semitone for every semitone on the keyboard. You can set this to 0, for example. So if we set this to 0, all the notes will sound the same. They'll sound like middle C. So that was part of a scale, and you can hear that they're all the same. If I play the same thing again at 100 cents per key, now you can hear that normal scale. If we put it at 200, you'll hear that, and I'll play the same C scale. It's now, for the keys in 1 octave, it's now scaled to 2 octaves. So this is one of the things I was talking about, is hardwired, the key tracking. So let's set this on 100, which is normally where you use it. Now if we want to assign modulation to the pitch, an LFO in this case, we'll go to the DSP mod page, and this means modulation. So what we're looking at is the pitch, and we're going to use source 1. So on the right hand side here, you've got, these are where you assign your modulators. So it's actually on this DSP mod page, you assign your modulators on the right hand side. So you select what parameter you want on the left, and then you go across to the right. And the little arrow here indicates what you're actually controlling. So we want to do pitch, and we want to assign LFO. So what we do is we scroll through this until we find the LFOs. The LFOs are quite a way up. So LFO 1 is what we're going to use. There's 2 LFOs per layer on the PC3, and one of them can be made global, so it can affect all layers, and it's free running, so it's always on. Now at the moment, if we want to edit the LFO, we can either hit edit, and you will need to edit it to start to set the initial parameters, or you press the LFO button here. And we're going into LFO 1. So let's set, nice and easy, let's set this to 1 Hertz, so 1 cycle per second. We'll set the minimum rate. Now you can set the maximum rate and assign a controller to affect the speed. So let's do that. Let's set the fast speed to 2 Hertz, and let's use the mod wheel. So you can hold down enter and move the mod wheel like that, or you can just scroll through the parameters using your alpha wheel. Okay, and you need to assign a shape, so let's go for a sine wave. That's the full sine wave, and you can use the phase to change the, I guess, the start and end points, but we'll leave it at 0. Okay, now if we go back, so what we've done, we've programmed the LFO. It goes at 1 Hertz at the low end of the mod wheel and 2 Hertz at the high end of the mod wheel. Rate control, sorry, it should be mod wheel here, is mod wheel. Now, if we go back to the DSP mod page, we've told LFO 1 to control the pitch here. Now if I hold down a key, what's going on? LFO 1 doesn't seem to be having an effect on the pitch. What we haven't done is we haven't said how much we wanted to affect it, and that's the next parameter below it, the depth parameter. Let's set that to 1 octave, or 1200 cents. Now if I hold a key, you'll hear the effect. So that's at the low end of the mod wheel. If I move the mod wheel up, it's a lot faster. Now typically you wouldn't set it to 1200. You might only set it for a small amount, just to get a little bit of movement on the sound. So that's how you can set the LFO very quickly on the PC3 to actually do something with the LFO. So in this case we've assigned it to the pitch. Now what we may want to do is we might want to assign an envelope to the low pass frequency, which is quite a common thing to do. In this case we'll assign the amplitude envelope. So again, we scroll across to the right, and we can select the parameter, select the controller. In this case we want the amplitude envelope. We have it there, and let's set it quite high. Let's set it to, I don't know, let's set it to 8,000 cents, for example. And we'll set this quite low so that we can actually hear the effect. And let's put some resonance on so that we can hear the effect. Okay, it doesn't sound very exciting at the moment, and the reason for that is that we haven't actually programmed the amplitude envelope. So let's have a look at that. We've just got the natural one. We explained, if you want to know what the natural and user envelopes are, watch the envelope tutorial. That's also available on Ustream here. and we'll go through that in a lot of detail. I'm not going to repeat that here. We did it to death last week. So let's just put a typical simple envelope in place here. Okay. So we now have the amplitude envelope is controlling both the amplitude of the sound, or the level, or how loud the sound is, and it's also controlling the filter. And we can change these times. Okay, so that's simply how you assign envelopes to do what those sliders on the Jupiter 8 would do. So essentially we've done the same thing. It's all controlled through this DSP mod page. And you can do it for any parameter, so you can do the same thing for resonance. You could assign a slider to the resonance, for example. So let's assign slider A. We just hold enter and move the slider, and it assigns it to source 1. Instead of having a fixed resonance value, let's put a resonance value onto source 1. So we need to turn off the resonance amount here. Okay, so that's with the slider up, the slider down. So that's as easy as it is to assign parameters, and that's really the strength of the variable architecture that's within the Kurzweil. This is really your #1 screen that you come to when you're doing your programming. Okay, so once you get your head around this, it's really your imagination. You can assign any controller you want to any parameter you want. You can assign controllers multiple times you could have mod wheel controlling all of the parameters if you want, or you can have parameters controlled by multiple controllers. And what we might do here is let's have a quick look at doing this. Let's say that we actually want to be able to control the amplitude envelope on the filter. So at the moment we've assigned it, and we've assigned an amount, but let's say we want to be able to fade that in with a slider, and we'll use slider B, which is MIDI 13, to do this. Now this is what source 2 and the depth control are used for. What we can do here is we can assign different controllers here, and we can fade in a controller and fade out a controller. So let's turn off amplitude envelope here, and instead let's assign it down here at the bottom. So because we want to fade it in. Let's say we want to fade it in with MIDI 13. Let's set source 2 to MIDI 13, and we'll set the depth control to the amplitude envelope. Okay, same sort of thing again. Let's set 8000 as the maximum depth. The minimum depth we'll leave at 0. But you can set the minimum depth to a different number if you want. Okay, so with MIDI 13 up, with it down, you don't hear anything because this low pass frequency is low. Let's turn this up a bit. Now as we push the slider up, you'll hear the envelope has more and more of an effect on the filter frequency. When we fade it down, it has less effect. Okay, so that's how you can. We've now got the amplitude envelope assigned using a slider, and we can fade it in and out. And again, you can use this throughout all of your programming. Now, one thing that can be a little bit confusing is the relationship between depth controller and source 2. And what I'm going to show you now is an equation that is used within the Kurzweil, in the PC3, the K2600, the K2000, of how these relate and what the output is. So let's have a quick look at this. Okay, so what happens is that the controller output is equal to whatever number you've put into or your source 2 controller, and you multiply it by the difference between the maximum depth and the minimum depth. You multiply it then by however much what you've got assigned to the depth controller, and then you add back the minimum depth. And that really is what the equation is. So essentially, you use your source 2 as essentially your enabler. Like that's your, generally you'd use that as your slider that phase things in and out, and the depth controller is what you then use to do your control. So as we've got here, we've got MIDI 13, and then we've got the amplitude envelope is assigned. And so if you need some details about exactly what's happening here and you want to get really into your programming, this is the equation that you want to use to understand what different things happen with the different controllers and the different amounts. Okay, we haven't got any questions up here. I'm probably going to finish this tutorial up shortly. I was only going to run a half-hour one. We've got a few minutes to go. So what I'll do also, just as a bit of an introduction, I'm going to take you through a few of the other, I guess, parameters within the program editor and some of the bits and pieces that you want to know when you start programming. So the algorithm page we went to before, this is where you decide the routing and how what blocks you're going to have. If you're going to have two filters here, if you're going to change it, you can use a sawtooth wave through a low pass. So this now generates a sawtooth instead of relying on a sample. And so the algorithm page is where you decide the routing and what filters, what processing blocks that you're going to use. DSP controller we've gone through. If you want to set key tracking, and this is something I didn't show you, on, for example, the filter, you can do the same sort of thing. You can have 100 cents per key. So now the filter is going to track the keyboard. So it's good for bandpass filters, for example. You might want to do this where you want to keep the bandpass around about what frequency you are on the keyboard. That's the way to do it. Set it with a key track. If you want to open the filter up a little bit more when you hit the keys harder, add a little bit to the velocity tracking. So this velocity tracking, and this is all on the DSP control page. This will, if you hit the keys harder, it will open up the filter more. This pad parameter can be quite important. Generally, you don't want to change so much, and if you do adjust it, you normally want to make the pad bigger because you can overload the blocks within the PC3. So if you're finding you're getting distortion, have a look at the pads. Most of the DSP control pages have got a pad parameter on them, and that lets you change the gain between the blocks so that you don't overload them. You also have a fine parameter, so if you want to do some fine tuning, particularly to things like pitch and that, you can do it there. And DSP mod page we've looked at, we've gone through all the parameters on that page. The output page, this is quite an important one, and this is where you can do your panning. So you can manually pan things left and right using this parameter, and you can change your pan mode. You can use the auto. So fixed means that whatever you set the pan is what it is. MIDI means that it responds to MIDI pan controller. So which is, I think, controller 8 to controller 10. And so when you receive MIDI pan messages, it will move the sound left and right. You can also set it to auto, which means that the left hand end of the keyboard is panned left, the right hand end is panned right. I think it's also reverse, which is the other way around. And you find that a lot of the pianos and things like that within the Kurzweil actually use the auto pan mode. But I tend to stick it on MIDI because if I'm doing my panning, I'm probably going to be driving it from a sequencer or something. You have a pan table here. This really relates to drum maps. So you can pan, there are maps set up within the Kurzweil for particular drum sets where you might have some individual keys that are pan left and some that are pan right to varying degrees. And this allows you to select which drum map or which pan map you have assigned. Drum remapping is for remapping Kurzweil drum key maps to general MIDI. So if you're using drum programs and you're using general MIDI, if you turn drum remap on, what it will do is it will take the incoming general MIDI signal and it will assign it to the right keys. Okay, so exclusive zone map. We won't go into this, but again, this is used for drums. Okay, so but we won't go into that at this stage. We'll look at that in another tutorial. All right, some of the other screens that we'll quickly look at. Common page is things that affect globally your the entire program. So this affects all layers. First one's a pitch bend. So if you want to, that's the amount that the pitch wheel modulates things. So if we turn that up, you can make a pitch bend more or less. So for all those guys that are out there doing prog rock and have an addiction to your pitch wheel, that's where you can change it and do things to it. You can also you can change the down amount separately as well, which is good. You can turn globals on and off here. This is things like the global LFO that I talked about before, which is LFO2. And something that's quite important, especially when you're programming sound sets, is this out gain parameter. What this does is it changes all of the layers and turns them up or down. And when you're programming sounds, a good idea and something that Dave Weiser from Kurzweil suggested to me was that if you make your programs sound about the same volume as programs 1, 2 and 3 on the Kurzweil, what you'll find is that, and you can use this outgain to do that very quickly, you'll find that when you call up a program you don't get nasty surprises like a really loud program or a really soft program. It keeps all the volumes about the same so that they're in a usable range. So that's a good parameter to quickly, if you're finding you're playing the program and it's much louder compared to all the other ones, changing that outgain parameter is a really quick way to bring that back into line or to adjust the volume of the entire program. So it's about the same as everything else. Output pan, again, this is an override of the individual layers, so you can adjust that for the entire program here if you wish. And again, you can change the pan mode for the entire program. And also you can assign a demo song. So if you press the play button, so if you go into some of these programs here and you press play, a little song will play. So there's a whole bunch of songs, and that's a really quick way to demo and to hear what a particular sound sounds like. Okay, let's just go back into here. Go through a few other pages. So we've got the common LFO page we've talked about, ASR page we talked about in the envelopes tutorial, which is the attack, sustain, release. They're very simple envelopes. The fun page, which is functions, we haven't talked about them in a lot of detail, but the funs are a way that you can combine different controllers and modulate them and have a specific output. So you can, for example, you might want to add 2 sliders together, or you might want to add 2 LFOs together. You can do that within this fun system and then assign that fun as the controller parameter in the DSP mod page we were on before. These are the envelope pages. So again, we covered them in a lot of detail last week. And prog effects is really where you assign your effects page. So that really is probably the basic pages. The rest of them are things like duplicate layer, new layers, deleting layers. You can import a layer from another program. If you've got a layer that you really like or you want to use as a basis, you can import that layer. And then these are file operations. You can change the name, you can save it, you can delete, and also info. You can put info in here. So next time you come back to use the program, you can say what controllers are assigned to what. You can put some notes in there that you want to use. So that's an express tour of program edit mode, and I hope that we've achieved our goal here and show you guys how to assign LFOs and envelopes quite easily to do the things that you're used to doing on other synths. It is quite easy to get lost. You can assign things and it can be very frustrating, I understand, when it doesn't do what you expect. You've assigned the LFO but it's just not doing anything. So we've just covered all the steps to make sure that you now know how to assign those LFOs and those envelopes. So thanks for tuning in. If you've got any questions, stick them up now and I'll try and answer them before I go. We've gone a little bit over time, but I'm sure you'll forgive me. What other messages have I got? I'm going to try and do another tutorial later this week. I'm expecting my new audio interface to arrive on Tuesday, and hopefully I can get it all wired up, and I tentatively will do a tutorial on Wednesday to show you guys how to assign MIDI clock as controller so that you can sync up the Kurzweil to your workstation. So we're going to have a look at that on Wednesday, assuming I can get everything running and I don't come across any problems. Otherwise, it'll be later on. This will probably be my last tutorial for a little while. Not sure what my schedule is going to be like over the next few weeks. If I can get some done, I'll let you guys know on the Kunker forum in the mahogany room. And so yeah, hopefully we'll be doing some more soon. So if you got any suggestions for tutorials you want to see, please drop us a note in mahogany room, and I'll do my best to do it. I want to try and make these interactive, so that as you guys are watching, please post questions if there's something that's unclear, if you need a little bit more explanation about what I'm doing, if you want me to try and explain it in a different way, or you have a particular problem, look, let me know, and we'll see if we can address it right there and then, and I can show you how to do things. There's no questions, so look, I'm going to say see you later. Please feel free to drop by my site, godlike.com.au, and yep, I'll see you guys all soon. Have a good one.